Hi, I'm 3Gnomes, an indie game developer currently working on a psychological horror 3D platformer, similar to Super Mario 64 or some of the other classics. In this game, you take control of a little gingerbread man who explores a hub-world house that opens up to all kinds of magical levels as you try to find out what happened to your creator. In last week's devlog, I mainly focused on creating Pinto, who is in the tutorial level. He's a little sad bean man. While playtesting the game, I quickly realized that I never actually added a collider to Pinto when I put him in the game, meaning essentially you could just walk right through him like he was a ghost. Ooh, that was stupid. So that was one of the first things I fixed in this devlog, so that if you're heartless enough, you can stand directly on his head, as he sits there being depressed that his sister is missing. After that, I decided to go back to the Fridge World level, and set up the bridges that go between the two islands, which would allow you to progress further in the game. When you first enter the Fridge World level, the bridge between the two islands is down, meaning you can't access the Snack Food Kingdom, which is the one with the cemetery that's falling apart here. That also leads into the Freezer level, but that's a later thing. First, I had to make it so that this bridge could be raised, and the way to do that is via the lever inside the Avocado Castle. So step one was just turning the lever to the off position, and then creating an animation so that it could be switched over to the on position. And then of course I forgot to actually set up a way for you to trigger it. So next was making it functional using the passive interact trigger that I'd already set up previously. And so now when you walked up to this lever, you could right click to flip it on. And then when you went outside, the bridges would be raised, giving you access to an entirely new part of this level. And while this was exciting, and I couldn't wait to start adding more to that side of the level, first I had to do some housekeeping on this lever. Specifically, I just had to set the lever so that if you'd already activated it and you went back to that level, you wouldn't have the option to activate it again. And this is the type of thing that game developers have to do 1,000 times a day that you probably never would have even thought about, but when you're making the game, these are the types of things you have to keep track of. And really, that's a day in the life of any game developer, just fixing tiny little problems that nobody else would think about, but you know people are going to uncover when they're playing. Another thing indie game developers always have to deal with is making things easier for the player so that there's less slog in the game. Slog meaning having to backtrack or grind or do anything that players are not going to just typically enjoy doing. For example, in the kitchen level, the way it's set up now, once you get off of the higher levels, such as the table or the counter, and you end up on the floor, there's really no way to get back up there except for going through the pantry level and coming out of the door that leads out to the cabinet and allows you to drop down onto the counter. And so I decided that once you'd done that once, you shouldn't have to go through the pantry again to get up on the higher levels. And so my solution was to make one of the stools sitting next to the counter start just going up and down once you'd regained access to the countertop. And with that set up, there was one less thing in the game to annoy players. The final mechanical issue I wanted to try and fix before I moved on to adding things to the snack level was fixing what happened when you die, because currently when you die, this happens. And that's it. The screen goes to black and nothing happens. You actually have to exit the game and go back in to restart that level. So the way that I fixed this was making it so that now when your character dies, you'll be sent back to the loading screen. And now dying no longer meant restarting the game entirely, which meant mechanically this game was pretty playable for at least the levels that I had made so far. But now I was excited to get back to adding things to my levels. In the snack level, one of the most prominent things that you'll see is the Cemetery of Sugar. And so to fit the theming of that, I decided to make a danger that pops up from in front of some of the gravestones. Specifically, what's made to look like a bony hand made out of candy. So I went through my typical process of making things, starting with Blender, where I do all of my 3D modeling and animating and rigging, things like that. And also typically I do a lot of texturing, but I don't think I do with this skeletal hand specifically. And then I import it into Unity. And it really only has two animations, an idle, where it just kind of drums its fingers on the ground waiting for something to come by, and then an attack animation for when something gets too close. Specifically, you. So I put it in Unity and set it up so that it can deal damage to the player and so that it will start moving and trying to attack you once you get within a certain radius. And then, recycling some textures that I already had in Unity, I made it look a little more dirty and grungy and skeletal, like it really had just come up from the ground. And now this part of the level had enemies of some sort. Next up, I wanted to add a new type of collectible to the game. Currently, you already had a coin and a cookie that you could collect. However, it was time to add in the candy. So I went through my typical process of making it in Blender, and then I imported it to Unity and added some particle effects to the prefab so that it would have a little bit of a glittery, glowing effect and catch your attention. And then I added the coding that would make it actually collectible, including a global variable that would keep track of how many of these you'd collected in total, And then, because it's meant to be more of a secret collectible, I hid it behind the castle. However, there is one more element to this collectible that I feel like I should mention, and that is that this collectible is one of the only ways that you gain access to the overarching story of the game. It's how you get answers about who created you and what is actually happening in the game. So it's a very important collectible. So in fact, when you collect it, every single individual candy will have its own line of dialogue that's actually voice acted by the people who are going to be voice acting in the game, that gives you some more information about what's happening. So you can beat the entire game without collecting any of these candies, but if you really want to get the most out of this experience, you're going to want to collect every single one of these. For example, when you collect this first one behind the castle, this is what you hear upon collecting it. Look, I understand why you want me to do this, but I feel stupid. I was a kid when I made all this shit up. And yeah, it's meant to be a bit weird and catch you off guard. That's kind of the point of it. And so I added more, moved them around to different places on the map, and added new lines of dialogue for every single one. For instance, this one in the cage. I mean, no matter what you lose in a place, it's still, you know, it's still... And there's actually a third one hidden behind this great gravestone for the King Waffle. No, I wouldn't say I was preoccupied with death. And I'm abbreviating what I'm actually playing, but there's actually full snippets of dialogue. I'm just playing bits of it for you here in the devlog. And so this is the week I actually had to get into doing real voice acting for this game. And I'm not going to be the only one. I'm going to be doing some voice acting. My girlfriend is going to be doing some. I have a few other people in mind that are going to do characters. So it is an overarching, in-depth story that's going to be told over the course of the game by you collecting these candies. If you do. Otherwise, you're just exploring a cute little world, and there's really nothing more to it than that. Enjoy. Now that I had this third collectible made, I needed to make it so that you could keep track of how many that you'd collected. And while for most levels it's not important enough to be on the actual screen constantly, like the cookie or the coin, I did want you to have a general idea of how many you had as you played through the game. And in fact, if you watched my last devlog, you might have noticed that when I made the loading screen, next to the cookie and the coin counter, there was a third collectible that just wasn't there, but the template for it was created. And that was always meant to be for this candy. So the first thing that I needed to do was create a little icon for it. And to make sure that it felt consistent with the cookie and the coin, I used the outline for those as the starting point. And for anyone wondering, I use Krita as my 2D art application. It's completely free, and I honestly think it's really easy to use, so that's what I'd recommend if you're looking. When that was finally done, I just slapped it in place on the loading screen, and now the loading screen actually was completely done. So, another thing down. Okay, enough mechanics. I was finally ready to get back to making new things for the Snack Kingdom. Specifically, it was time to start looking at the top of the cake mountain. And the first thing that I wanted to work on that's been bugging me is that these birthday cake candles don't have any flames, they're not lit, and they should be. And since in one of my past devlogs, I spent some time learning how particle systems worked, I figured I'd play around and see if I could make some estimation of fire. Honestly, it didn't have to look great, in my opinion. It just had to look like a general fire effect. If it turned out cartoony or not realistic looking, that was fine. That honestly fit my game perfectly. So I started fiddling around with it, and it took some trial and error, but eventually I ended up with something that was close enough to fire to suit my needs. And I moved that around to all of the candles, and finally the birthday cake was lit. It's lit. I'm sorry. I gotta stop making dumb jokes. Now the candles were lit, but there still needed to be something on the top of this mountain, and I had a very fun idea for what it would be. So I did a quick sketch of my idea, which was for melting Marshton, who was once a great protector that guarded the entrance to the freezer where the snack citizens who had survived the attack from the Health Kingdom were now hiding out. However, because he was so close to all of these burning candles, he had melted down into just a blob of marshmallow agony. So I took that sketch and began making it in Blender. You've seen this process, modeling, texturing, all that jazz. And then I imported him into Unity and popped him on top of the mountain. I made the decision to animate him in Unity because it's just a really simple up and down when you bounce off of his head. Which leads me to my next point. When you get on top of him, you're supposed to be able to bounce on his head up into the entrance to the freezer level. After effectively turning him into a bounce pad, the next thing was to give him a dialogue box so that he could talk to you. And that was fun to set up. However, when I tried it, I realized that the zoom in camera that's supposed to focus in on who you're talking to didn't really make a lot of sense with how big this character was. First, I tried just kind of zooming it back a little bit. However, of course, it lined up exactly with something in the way. So I tried again, even zooming it back further and higher up to get a full view of the scene, and I felt like that was perfect. And now, melting Marston was completely set up, and ideally you should be able to get into the freezer level. However, between the freezer level and this level, I intend to make a transition level with a kind of fun little platformer area that you have to climb through to get to the actual freezer. And this will pretty much be the first time you've seen me build an entire level from scratch, so make sure you tune in next time to see that. Also, some people have been asking about a Discord, so I'm going to set that up, and at some point I would like to stream me actually working on the next level I'm making. So if you're interested in that, make sure you let me know and join the Discord. I'll link it in the description down below, and then you'll know if I intend to stream and you'll be able to talk to me. So if you're interested in that, let me know. Make sure you like and subscribe. It really means a lot to me. Share with your friends. I mean, this project is really just getting started, and the more support I can get for it, the better. Thank you so much for watching. I'm 3 Gnomes, and I haven't decided on an official sign-off, so I'm just gonna, let's see. Life is sweet, and then sometimes you die violently. That's okay. That's such a bad sign-off. Okay. Anyways, toodles.